So how are you all? Wait, how are you? How are you? Good, good, good. So as I said, I am Jannique Stewart with the Life Training Institute, and I actually want to begin my time with you with a quick story of how my eyes were kind of opened to the intolerance of tolerance in a way that I never really expected. Last year, in 2019, I was actually invited to speak at Cornell University. So it's an Ivy League. They invited me to speak on the issue of abortion. I said, really? This is great. Are you sure? So my contact there, Katerina, said, yeah, absolutely. She goes, here's what we're going to do. Just in case, I'm going to make sure that we get the topic of abortion approved. So she got the topic approved. Then she said, you know what? Let me make sure the student board president approves of the topic. The student board president approved of the topic. And then she said, let's just take it one step further to be safe. Why don't we have the entire student board vote on it? And they all voted that yes, I would be the speaker to come talk about the abortion issue. They approved the date for April 23rd, and then 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. Katerina says, Jannique, we have a problem. And I said, well, wait, what do you mean we have a problem? You told me it was approved, the topic. You told me the date was approved. You told me that the president, as well as the student board union, had approved it. So what's the problem? She said, well, unfortunately, when they did research into your background, when they Googled your name, they found out that you're actually associated with a ministry that deals with biblical sexuality. I said, okay. She goes, yes. She goes, and not just that, but if we understand correctly, in 2008, you were the spokesperson for the marriage amendment in Florida that defined marriage as one man and one woman. And I said, yes. She goes, well, because of your views on sex before marriage and because of your views on marriage being between one man and one woman, we have to disinvite you. I said, wait a minute. What do you mean you have to disinvite me? She said, well, the board had a discussion, and they've heard your audio. They've actually heard, they didn't actually watch any of the videos, they just listened to a lot of them. And she said, well, the board felt that if we have you on campus, it's like having someone on campus with pro-Holocaust, pro-slavery views. In fact, oh, it gets worse. She said, in fact, a couple of the board members are wondering if you actually are pro-slavery. And I'm like, have they seen me? Do they know I have brown skin? And she goes, oh, no, I guess not. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is crazy. So I said, wait. I said, Katerina, number one, I know my rights. And I know that you cannot disinvite me simply because of my views. That's actually called viewpoint discrimination. So you go back to the board and tell them they cannot discriminate me on the basis of my Christian views. On the basis of my worldview, they cannot discriminate against me and claim that my views are pro-Holocaust or likened to pro-slavery. So she did go back. They said, okay, well, she is kind of right. So we'll go on and leave it, but we'd rather it be someone else from the organization that doesn't hold those views. So I said, well, I'm going to stay. I'm going to stand firm. A couple of weeks later, I get a call back. And again, guess what? I was disinvited for the second time. But this time, she said, well, this time it is firm. I said, but why, Katerina? Now what's going on? She goes, well, here's the thing. And it was, they just kept exaggerating things. But then she said, well, they just feel that the students won't be able to listen to your speech because they'll be so bothered by your discriminatory views. I said, now let's think through this. It's an Ivy League school, not 5-year-olds, and you're telling me they can't possibly listen to someone with a differing viewpoint? She goes, well, that's the position they're holding to. So then I got into contact with Liberty Counsel, and I went back and forth. But here's what was very interesting. I was shocked that at a university where there's supposed to be a bastion of ideas, where the whole purpose is to discover truth, I was being silenced simply because of my viewpoint. You guys, I wasn't even supposed to be there to talk about sexuality or marriage. I was there to talk about abortion. But simply because of the views that I held, they said, nope, you're not welcome here on this campus. They said, in fact, if you come, we're probably going to have to raise about $100,000 for security fees. And I'm like, there's no way. That's just ridiculous. But that's exactly what I was told, and that's what the attorneys were told. And I was shocked, and that's when my eyes were open that, wait a minute. We very much are in an age of intolerance, especially when it comes to a Christian worldview, especially when it comes to whether or not there is a such thing as truth. Now let's see if I do it this way or this way. Oh. So, a lot of you, were any of you here last year? Okay, so a few of you know that I am single, but now I have a 20-year-old. She's actually 20, almost 21. Yes, and I feel like it was just yesterday I held her in my arms. That's her. Her name is Princess Twinkle Toes. Yes, now the human, everyone's like, wait, who's the human? That's my niece. But this is my little 7.5-pound little girl. Yes, we go on walks together. There she is. Look at that face. But yes, she is the apple of my eye. But I want to talk about why this matters to you all. How many of you do plan to go to perhaps a secular university when you graduate? How many of you plan to go to perhaps a faith-based? Okay. Well, here's what I do want us to consider with that. Let me see. We assume that even if it's Christian, we're not going to have pushback. Ladies and gentlemen, I actually went to a Christian college, and let me tell you, I was surprised that I would actually have pushback, because one of the issues is we are in an age where there is a battle for ideas. And not just a battle over ideas, but a battle for truth. I love this quote. It's actually from the movie Inception. But think about the power, you guys. Think about the power of an idea. Think about ideologies that have ravaged entire nations. Think about ideologies that have targeted specific groups of human beings. We can thumb through the pages of history and we can see that the power of an idea, it can impact an entire country. It can impact an entire nation. It can impact an entire generation. So consider, an idea is like a virus, he says, resilient, highly contagious, and even the smallest seed of an idea can grow. It can grow to define or destroy you. Now, I don't know how many of you ever listened to Breakpoint with John Stonestreet, but he says all ideas have consequences, good or bad. But here's the problem. Bad ideas leave behind victims. Bad ideas leave behind victims. And so I want you to consider, when it comes to truth, when it comes to morality, do you hold ideas that you know line up with the Word of God? Or are your views in alignment with social media? With perhaps what we see on streaming television? Sometimes our views, our ideas line up with our friends. But here's what I want us to consider. Why is there all this confusion over what is tolerance and intolerance? Because believe it or not, those definitions have basically switched. But why is there all this confusion? You see, tolerance now means the opposite of what it actually used to mean. And one of the problems with that is now we're in what's called modern, in fact, it's postmodern. We're no longer a Christian nation. We're no longer post-Christian, but really no longer even really postmodern. It's more almost, we're getting very close to almost an anti-Christian society where they don't even want to hear our views. It is not even welcome in the marketplace of ideas. We already see that on university campuses. Modern tolerance, the modern definition says that basically you have to agree with the politically correct positions and ideas. That is modern tolerance. Whether it's on some of the major issues going on, whether it's on social issues, even when it comes to morality, for you to be seen as tolerant, you need to buy in to their ideas. That's a problem. Because what if their ideas are morally wrong? Do you have the courage, and will you have the courage to stand up, even if that means you are standing all alone? I mean, really, you won't be standing alone because God will be with you, but will you have the courage to stand for truth, even if your friends are telling you not to? Will you have the courage to stand for truth, even when it's unpopular, even when it might mean that you could lose your job, you could lose a scholarship? The classic view of tolerance is pretty simple, that true tolerance, it recognizes and respects the beliefs and practices of others we disagree with, but we still treat them with dignity and respect. Classic tolerance means, what is the red word there? What is the red word? Yeah, that means for tolerance to even be on the table, we have to disagree. Because guess what? You don't really tolerate people with the exact same idea. You're on the same side. You don't need to tolerate them. You tolerate people that you disagree with. That is the very basis, and that's what is necessary for tolerance to be even on the table. There has to be point of views that are different from one another. But look at the last part of that sentence. It says, but we treat one another with dignity and respect. That, my friends, is the correct definition of tolerance. And with my time this morning, we're going to look at tolerance, the correct definition, the incorrect, but we're also going to look at how is tolerance being used in our society to suppress and silence dissenters. How is it used to perhaps even silence moral truth? And is there such thing as moral truth? You see, all those things absolutely matter. I love this from Bishop Fulton Sheen. Look at what he says. Now, this is from 1931. 1931, he says, there is no other subject on which the average mind is so much confused as the subject of tolerance and intolerance. But look at how he explains it. Tolerance applies only to persons, but never to principles. Intolerance applies only to principles or ideas, but never to persons. So if you have your phone, I recommend you have, I see some of you are already doing that. Go on, take a screenshot, because this is classic. This is an excellent definition of true tolerance. Okay, so some of you are still, okay, very good. And now, right here, here's another one from the same Bishop Fulton Sheen. He says, America, it is said, is suffering from intolerance. He said it's not. It's suffering from tolerance. What does he mean by that? Tolerance of right and wrong, truth and error, virtue and evil, Christ and chaos. Our country is not nearly so overrun with the bigoted as it is overrun with the broad-minded. Love that. But let's think through that. Is it possible that part of the problem is that we don't even know how to determine right from wrong? We really don't know how to determine right from wrong. I really kind of feel like when I used to be in pharmaceuticals, part of my background is that I actually used to be a diabetes specialist in the field of pharmaceuticals. And you guys, I had no idea there was a disease called diabetes neuropathy. And what it does is we actually would have patients come, we would put them on the table, and they would have to remove their socks. Now, most of the time, they couldn't remove their socks on their own, oftentimes because of all kinds of mobility or dexterity issues. So we would have someone remove their socks. And I can't tell you how often at least 20% of our long-term diabetics would sometimes have thumbtacks or nails in the bottom of their foot, and they could not feel it. And I remember the very first time I saw this, you guys, I passed out cold on the floor. And the doctor was like, oh my gosh, we can't have this. So I was so embarrassed. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. But here's what was very interesting. They did not know that they actually had a disease state that was so bad, they were desensitized to pain. Not only were they desensitized to pain, some of them couldn't even feel a foot massage. So even something that's good, that's actually supposed to help the circulation, they couldn't feel. You see, I kind of feel like, very similarly, we might not have diabetic neuropathy, but I think sometimes we have spiritual neuropathy, where we're desensitized to right from wrong. You see, it's one thing if the world is trying to silence us or if the world is trying to blur the lines. That's on them. It's something else if we have spiritual neuropathy and we're not doing anything about it. If we're not in the Word, if we don't know what the Word of God says on a lot of the different moral issues of our day, then honestly, we're going to be desensitized. And if we're desensitized, that means we're disengaged. And if we're disengaged, how do we fulfill our mandate to be salt and light in a darkened world? Let it not be said of us, let it not be said of you as climbers that we were spiritually apathetic, or that you actually had a form of spiritual neuropathy. Now, part of the problem is that people do confuse different types of claims. I love this George Barna poll. Consider, 22% of adults said moral truth is objective. But look, only 6% of teens agreed with that. But on the contrast, 66% of Christian adults said moral truth is not objective, but rather it's subjective. It also says that 91% of Christian teens said there is no objective moral truth. Now look at that last one. 91%. You guys, how many of you kind of find that's pretty high? Yeah, right? 91% say that there is no moral or objective moral truth. Wow. You see, that's why it is necessary then for us to know truth, for us to be bold to speak about truth, but also for us to pursue truth. Jesus said, John 8, that you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free, but how do we know it? We actually have to pursue truth. Now, when we also look at some of these phrases. This is an example of moral relativism, of when people are confused about right and wrong. Look at this, and I want you to find what is the key word in all of these. Don't like gay marriage? Don't get one. Don't like abortion? Don't have one. Don't like birth control? Don't use it. Don't like sex? Then don't have it. Don't like porn? Don't watch it. If you don't like something, then just don't do it. It's that simple. But you know, what's wrong here? These have to do with morality. What is the key word that they are interjecting in this to try and change the type of claim? Begins with an L. What is it? Like. You guys, morality is not about whether or not we like something. It has nothing to do with our feelings. The facts of our faith do not care about our feelings. That's not what it's about. So let's consider then, what actually is then? Because we often hear people say that, and they'll say, well, okay, but wait a minute. With slavery, would this ever fly? If we were 200 years ago dealing with slavery, can you imagine someone saying, hey, listen, don't like slavery? Then don't have a slave. Imagine if the North and South were saying that to each other. They miss the point entirely. It has nothing to do with likes. It has to do with, is there a such thing as moral truth? So, I love when we see that even the Pope sometimes will get it right. And I love when he said right here that we're moving toward a dictatorship of relativism, which does not recognize anything as for certain and which has at its own highest goal one's own ego and one's own desires. That was very wise of him to say, but think about it. We are very much moving toward a dictatorship of relativism. Now, how many of you prefer chocolate ice cream? How many of you would agree with this statement? Chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla. Raise your hands high. Be proud. Be proud of your flavor, okay? How many of you say, no, pumpkin, it's the other way around. I prefer vanilla. Okay, even in the back there, okay. I think, I'm sorry to tell you, I think vanilla ice cream won. Now, how many of you kind of like both? Oh, look at that. Oh, look, peace in the Middle East. This is so great. Oh, now you guys, here's the thing. Ice cream is just ice cream. There is no moral aspect to it, and that's the problem. When people see things like that list that I had up there, whether it's pornography or abortion or same-sex marriage, and they think it's a matter of likes. No, the ice cream flavor you choose, that is a matter of likes. That is a matter of taste. Literally, it's a matter of taste. There is no such thing as, well, we've actually been able to prove that vanilla is better than chocolate. Nope, it's a matter of taste and preference. Morality is in a whole different category. You see, taste is in what we call subjective. That's in the subjective realm. But all the way over here on the other side, and I said all the way on the other side, is objective truth. Objective moral truth has nothing to do with a preference, has nothing to do with our feelings. It lives in the realm, and I see some of you are taking copious notes, write down the word big, reality. Objective truth always lines up with reality, or it reflects or correlates to reality. So when someone says, for example, that abortion, well, for me, I think it's okay. You know what they've done? They've actually done what's called a category error. They try to make abortion a matter of personal taste. It's not. We have a moral lawgiver, and it's our job to come into alignment with morality, with his morality, not the other way around. You see, with objective truth, we discover what he has already outlined for us. Human trafficking, just as an example. In fact, we're actually going to talk about that in just a second. Is right or wrong a matter of opinion? Or is it more than that? Are there some things that are just flat out right or wrong? Or is it kind of like ice cream? It's just a matter of opinion. Now, let's go to right here. What is moral relativism? Moral relativism is the belief, and you can take your pictures, that right and wrong is either up to the individual in their society, but it also says there are no moral standards. There are no moral standards outside of us. That's where we are right now, very much like when we saw in the book of Judges. In Judges 21:25, it says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own what? Look at you. Good job. In their own eyes. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That is the definition of moral relativism. But is there such thing as truth and even right or wrong? You're looking at a picture of what? What is it? Okay, question. Was this morally wrong? Was it acceptable because, hey, the country said it was okay? Or do you think it's kind of like flavors of ice cream? It's just a matter of opinion. How many of you say it was always wrong, no matter what? Raise your hands. Yes. Is there anyone here who would say, well, I beg to differ? No. Even when I'm speaking at universities, I never have anyone say to me, well, that's a matter of opinion. What about human trafficking? The modern day sex trade where women and children, even sometimes as young as 6 years old, when I travel to Cambodia, sometimes little kids are trafficked. Question. Even in countries where they look the other way, where it is okay according to that culture, is it still morally wrong? How many of you say it's always wrong? Okay. Interesting. Most of the time, people will agree that's always wrong. Now we're beginning to see people say, well, I don't know. Who am I to judge? And that's scary. But what about when it comes to some of the other moral issues of our day that some would say, well, I don't know. That's kind of controversial. You guys, listen. Just because something might be psychologically complex, just because it might be emotionally complex, it doesn't mean there isn't a morally correct way to proceed. When we look at this, how many of you have actually, do I need to move? How many of you have actually seen, whether it's a hashtag or maybe it's something on social media where people say love is love is love is love? Okay, now, question. Is there such thing as moral truth when it comes to love? Is there such thing as truth when it comes to the definition of love? Is there? Yeah, you see, this is where kind of people get confused. Or, what about this when it comes to abortion? Can you all read what the sign says? Parasites don't have what? Okay, you guys, is there truth when it comes to the abortion issue? Because here's the thing, either the unborn is a parasite or it's not, but it can't be both at the same time. Either you were a parasite at one time, but question, when did you change species? Or are you still a parasite? Just joking. Just joking. I'm joking. But you see, we have to pursue what is true. So even when we're dealing with moral relativism, here's what comes up when people say things like this, and here's how you know that person has a little bit of moral relativism. And you guys, you know what? Sometimes we don't realize we're saying it. We're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just came out of my mouth. When people say things like, well, that's just your view, or, well, don't force your morality on me, or this one, who am I to judge? In fact, how many of you have heard people say, well, that's true for you, but it doesn't mean that's true for me, right? People say that all the time. Or I don't want to force my morality on others. People will say when it comes to abortion, pro-choice is the neutral choice. Guys, there's no such thing as neutrality when it comes to whether or not someone's going to be killed. There's no Switzerland there. If someone is going to lose their life, we don't have the luxury of sitting back and saying, well, I'm kind of neutral. No such thing as having that neutral cap on there. Or, the most quoted verses, it's not John 3:16. It's actually judge not lest you be judged. Let it not be said of any of you climbers, please do not ever say this next one, well, who am I to judge? I'll tell you who you are to judge. You're moral agents. Every single one of us, we're made in the image of God. Within every single one of us is a moral compass. Because think about it. If we're not the ones judging as human beings, then who is going to? I know my dog Prissy sure isn't. She wants to kiss everyone. We're moral agents, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have the luxury of sitting back and saying, well, I don't want to get involved. Who am I to judge? Or I don't want to hurt their feelings or be mean. Part of dealing with people with different viewpoints, you guys, part of that is just called adulting. And whether or not their feelings get hurt or not, I think that we have to make sure our tone is loving. But sometimes, no matter how kind you are, people are going to take offense. Ever met people like that and you're like, I was so nice, right? You're like, I almost sang Kumbaya with them, and everything, they're like offended. Every little thing, you guys. We have to make sure that we're not trying to appeal to their feelings, but that we are trying to appeal to truth. Now, the Bible commands that we are not to judge others in a mean way. In fact, when we look at the Bible's definition of judging, the Bible's command that we not judge others does not mean that all actions are equally moral. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean also that truth is relative. But look at this next point. The Bible clearly teaches that truth is objective, eternal, and it's inseparable from God's holy character. Think about it. When we call adultery or murder a sin, we are passing judgment. But did you know that it's in alignment with God? It's in alignment with the Word of God. You see, we've been conditioned as a society to think that all judging is wrong. Did you know John 7:24 tells us we are to judge rightly? In fact, Matthew 7 actually talks about different types of judging. And so I actually want to be clear with that. Please take a picture. When it comes to judging versus our feelings, did you know in the Bible there's actually many different types of uses for the word judge? In fact, one of the words, it actually is the most broad or general, it's krino. And what it actually means is to determine or discern right from wrong. And then when you look in Strong's Concordance, it has anakrino, diakrinos, all these different types. But here's what I want you to consider. When you look at the first one, krino, to determine or discern right from wrong. Guys, we do that every day. You know what? You guys did it when you came here. How many of you have been to the bathroom already this morning? You actually made a judgment. You determined, do I go with the skirt or the pair of pants on the door? Okay, yeah. We make judgments every day. We discern one from the other. Whether or not you smoke, whether or not you drink, whether or not you drink and drive, whether or not you use foul or profane language. All of those things are the ability to determine or discern right from wrong, as well as all morality. We've been conditioned to think that it's wrong to judge. No, our very life depends upon it. And what about the next one? Katakrisis, which is, this is the wrong one. We're not supposed to do the second one where we condemn people or damn them to hell. We are not to stand in position to determine if someone else is damned to hell, but we are to discern right from wrong. Please do not ever let this exit your spirit. We are never be ashamed for knowing right from wrong. Do not ever allow someone to silence you when it comes to knowing right from wrong. You see, feelings don't trump facts or truth. Feelings can be incorrect, and let's be honest, can our feelings change? Yes, we've all seen Facebook, right? Now, we are moral agents, like I said. That means we have an obligation to discern right from wrong and to defend moral truth. So consider now, let's look at classical tolerance. True tolerance recognizes and respects, again, the beliefs and practices of others we disagree with, but we treat them with dignity and respect, right? Now, Peter Kreeft, he's actually from Boston College, and he's a professor of philosophy there. I want you to take a picture of this one too, because this is a very simple way to remember the definition of classical tolerance. We are to be egalitarian regarding persons, but we are to be elitist regarding ideas. Now, we all know what elitist means, to be an elite. That means a lot of people say, oh, that's kind of like snobby. Okay, well, he's telling us, yeah, we are to be snobby when it comes to ideas. But we're not to be snobby when it comes to people. In fact, we are to be egalitarian. What does egalitarian mean? The root word there is E-G-A-L. In French, it's actually égal, which means equal. It actually comes from Old French and Latin, and they use the E-G-A-L, meaning equal. You see, you guys, that's rooted in Imago Dei. We're to treat every single human being equal to us. Regardless of their views, they could be wacky. You could be thinking, oh my gosh, are we in Colorado? Because I'm pretty sure they're high right now. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We're still supposed to treat them with dignity and respect. But ideas, we're not to accept all ideas as equal. Because think about it, are all ideas equally true and valid? No. So consider, let's look at some examples of this. I'm actually going to fast forward through this. I want to make sure you see what I'm talking about. Modern tolerance. This is the modern tolerance that we're seeing. Oh, coexist. What do they mean by this? Because some people are like, that's so sweet. No, it's not. Not when you really understand what it's about. Question, and this is religion. This is where we deal with religious pluralism. Are all of these religions the same? Do all roads lead to God? Do they? I can't hear you. Do all roads lead to God? Are you sure? Are you sure? Well, technically they do, because we all have to face judgment, but not all roads will lead to eternity with him. We'll all face judgment where you have to stand before him and be judged for rejecting him, right? So we're all going to stand before him, every single one of us, but we're not all going to spend eternity with the Father. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through who? Yeah, that's exclusive. That's John 14:6. We know that one. So all of these cannot be equally true at the same time. But you see, that's the problem. The modern view of tolerance says all religions are equally valid and true. They'll say, like, think about it. Did Jesus claim to be the Messiah? Okay. In Islam, is Jesus the Messiah? No. What happens to us when we die? If we are a believer, I mean, yes, we're all eventually going to stand before him and be judged, but question, when we die, do we just absorb into the earth and then become a tree or a flower? Do we become like, are we reincarnated? Are we? Because here's the thing. All of these different religions have different answers for what happens to us when we die. But you know what? They cannot all be true at the same time, now can they? They cannot all be true. So by the very definition, you see, all religions have what's called contradictory truth claims. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when we don't know, why do we believe what we believe about Christianity? Why do we believe in the death and the resurrection? Why? Now, there's 3 different types of tolerance that people want you to consider. Ideas, that all ideas are equal. But look at this next one, behaviors. You see, we might be used to the first one, but question, are all behaviors equal? Are all behaviors equally valid? No. Are all people equal, though? Yes. So when you look at these, there's really only one that fits the proper definition. You see, we are not to assume that all ideas are equal, because they're not. In fact, there are some bad ideas. There are some silly ones, some crazy ones. But there are also some evil ideas. Now, I want us to now consider, from the Rubin Report, Dave says, because of the authoritarian crusade to shelter young people from ideas that might challenge them, we've created safe spaces where once we had rigorous debate, we issue trigger warnings where we once were brave enough to hear ideas that would make us uncomfortable. Ben Shapiro has a very similar. He says, freedom of speech and thought matters, especially when it's speech and thought with which we disagree. The moment the majority decides to destroy people for engaging in thought it dislikes, thought crime becomes a reality. Now let's look at what that looks like, okay? I want us to consider Rider University, okay? This is really interesting. They actually would not allow Chick-fil-A at the school. Yeah, they would not allow Chick-fil-A at the school. And I was like, are you kidding me? But I also want you to consider, let's see, J.K. Rowling. Are you guys familiar with what actually happened to her recently? When she said that sex matters, especially when it comes to the transgender issue, what happened? She was attacked and she was called intolerant. She was called a bigot. They said, you are inciting hate speech. They said she's transphobic, but it's not just her. Let's see. Martina Navratilova, she's actually a lesbian, but she actually says that when it comes to transgenders competing in sports, that it's not fair for a biological male who identifies as a woman to compete against girls. And they said, you are being a traitor to the LGBTQ community. They said, you're a transphobic. You see, oftentimes when people do not agree, they automatically attack them rather than the argument. What do these all have in common? Who's the gentleman in the blue? Nick Cannon. Who's next? And okay. Now let's look at the ladies here. Anyone? Nicole Scherzinger, Celine Dion, and Jordan Sparks. What do they all have in common? They all are pro-life, and all were harassed in the media because of their pro-life views. They were called, especially like even the women, Nicole Scherzinger identifies as a feminist, but she identifies as a pro-life feminist. They said, you're not welcome to walk with us on the Women's March. Now, do you guys remember the sportscaster? He was actually fired, 60 years old, because he tweeted. Now look at what he tweeted. All lives matter, when he was asked by one of the players on his opinion on Black Lives Matter movement. Now, I really have a problem with this because he says, DeMarcus down below asked him, hey, what's your take on BLM? Look at what he says. Hey, how are you? I thought you forgot about me. Haven't heard from you in years. All lives matter, every single one. I do not believe he had malintent in his heart. But you see, because he is not following what the protocol is right now according to society, the politically correct thing to say is only Black Lives Matter, regardless if you don't agree with the organization, regardless. You see, I believe that's very dangerous. And so when we look and return to the classical tolerance, we know we're supposed to be egalitarian toward ideas and behaviors, is what modern tolerance says. They flip it. You're supposed to be egalitarian toward ideas and behaviors. Classical tolerance says, nope, you're egalitarian towards people. The modern view says you're elitist toward people, and that's why when people disagree with the politically correct ideas of our day, they're called names. Because once you twist the definition and you redefine it and you become egalitarian towards ideas and behaviors, we then have a society that treats human beings as if they're the enemy simply because of a viewpoint. You see, what we believe matters. And if we don't know the truth, we will end up being deceived, and we're also likely to end up falling in to silence. The very beginning I said, you know what? Let it not be said of us that we silenced ourselves. It's one thing when the world tries to, but when it comes to us, we should never silence ourselves. Let it not be said of us that we have spiritual neuropathy, where we're desensitized to right from wrong and we don't know. We have a moral responsibility to search out the scriptures. If you don't know what the Bible says on marriage or sexuality, let's read the Bible. Let's be Bereans and search the scriptures. Let's be kind in our conversation, speak the truth in love. Let's listen and dialogue, but let us not be afraid to speak the truth. I thank you very much for your time.